Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to let you know that we have a very special guest with us today and a very special seminar. So our guest is Dr. Ronald Latanision, who is our Neil Armstrong Distinguished Visiting Professor, and he's here at Purdue University with us today. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction, and then I'll give the floor to Dr. Latanision. So Dr. Latanision, he held a joint faculty appointment in Department of Material Science and Engineering and in the Department of Nuclear Engineering at MIT until he joined the science and engineering consulting firm Exponent Incorporated as a corporate vice president and later as the firm's first senior fellow. His research is focused mostly on corrosion of metals, materials processing, and the behavior of materials in aqueous environments, including ambient and high temperature pressure conditions. His work has covered processing technologies and electrochemical systems such as batteries, fuel cells, waste destruction, stress corrosion cracking, hydrogen embrittlement, and photoelectrochemistry. So he has done a lot of things, as you can imagine. He serves as the editor-in-chief in the National Academy of Engineering Quarterly, which is called The Bridge. He's also a member of the National Academy of Engineering, which is, trust me, is really, really hard to get and become a member. He's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Science and is fellow of National Association of Chemical Engineering International and of ASM International. He has also served as a science advisor to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science and Technology. He was a member of the Massachusetts Office of Science and Technology Advisory Committee, the National Materials Advisory Board of the National Research Council, and the NRC's Standing Committee on Chemical Demilitarization. Finally, in 2002, he was appointed by the President George W. Bush to serve on the U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, and later reappointed for a second four-year term by President Barack Obama. So, please join me in welcoming our special guest today.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to just see a show of hands. How many of you are not nuclear engineers? Well, there are some non-nuclear. Okay. This is very good. Okay, thank you. I want to say that I'm delighted to be here. I have to admit I especially like the idea of being able to say Neil Armstrong and Ron Latanision in the same sentence. That makes me feel very good. No, I'm very honored to be here as the Neil Armstrong Distinguished Visiting Professor. It's just a genuine pleasure and honor. So, you know, today we're gonna do something quite different. We're gonna have a conversation. I don't have any slides, no videos, so it's going to be very, very important that you can hear me, and when I'm going to ask you to participate in a discussion. So there'll be questions, and I'll look for answers. It's just going to be a friendly conversation. When I first started thinking about this presentation back a couple of months ago, I came to the title, Preserving Public Trust in Technology, which I think is a very important topic. But over the last 2 months, our world has changed pretty drastically. And I began thinking maybe I should change the title to The Extortion of American Universities. And I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but I kind of mean it. I've resisted that urge. I'm not going to talk about that directly. But I will say two things. There was a group of about 2,000 members of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that signed a letter to the American public having to do with I think it is fair to say extortion of American universities. I'm a signatory to that letter. I hope you will read it. It's in the public domain. And then secondly, I signed a second letter, also constructed by a distinguished group of scientists and engineers, that was directed not toward the American public, but the Congressional Budget Office, Budget Authorization Office. Both of these letters have to do with the concern that academics have over the constraints and threats that are being posed to American universities. I think that's a great problem. American universities are the engine of invention and innovation that has changed our lives so much for the better in general. And there's so much more to be done that I think it's absolutely misguided to take this action. I'm very proud of Harvard for the action they've taken to resist the pressure that's put on them. I hope that other universities and law offices and businesses will follow their example, because I think it's a serious threat to the kinds of things that make a lot of difference to the American public. If you think of the impact of science and engineering on medicine, energy, conversion, the atmosphere, clean atmosphere, food and medicine, all of the, you just name it, all of the things that are so important to our culture, that I just felt compelled to do that, and so I did. So I'm pleased to do that. But today we're going to have a conversation. I'll leave extortion to another day. We're going to have a conversation on public trust and technology. There's one ground rule, and I'll give you a little bit of background. I grew up in a small coal mining town in northeast Pennsylvania. There are about 100 people in this town. You were either Ukrainian or Polish. There were no other alternatives. My name is an anglicized Ukrainian name. And there were times when people had disagreements, sometimes had loud disagreements, the coal miners. But I never remember an incident where they did not end their conversation without being personally disagreeable. They may have disagreements on some point, but they weren't personally disagreeable. They were respectful and civil. I want this conversation to be that way. If you don't agree with me on something I'm going to say, you're perfectly welcome, and I want to hear from you. But I want to make the point, and this has got to be, I want to see a show of hands when I ask this question. I want to make sure that we all leave this room on the same, with the same terms, that we may be disagreeable, but we will not leave this room personally disagreeable. You agree? All right. I see most hands up. You didn't have your hand up. Uh-oh, there's a troublemaker there. I don't know. I'm teasing. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I want to give you a little bit of a preamble to some examples of what I'm talking about when I talk about public trust in technology. Short preamble. And then I'm going to turn to a couple of case histories, and that's where I'm going to ask you questions. So let me start with this overview or preamble, or it's a sort of a framework to our conversation. You all know that we live in a very technologically intense world. The intensity of that world changed dramatically in November of 2022 with the introduction of ChatGPT. Now, I want to emphasize, what does GPT stand for? It's Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And I want to emphasize pre-trained. It produces human-like text based on the input it receives in order to produce that text. So I want to emphasize two things. It's pre-trained on input information, data. We'll come back to that. I think it's fair to say that generative AI, or even AGI, artificial general intelligence, AGI, they're really mind-blowing when you think about it. But I think they're new technology, just like any other new technology. And they pose both benefits and risks. And I want to use two examples to make the point. Let's talk about the evolution of the telephone and the evolution of the automobile. Now think about this. Think about a time when your only means of distance communication was through telegraph, or that was about it, you know. And then all of a sudden, you find that technology has developed a telephone. And you can pick up this device, and you can talk to someone who's miles and miles away. That must have been really shattering to people. You know, all of a sudden you could do this. Now I remember this. I don't remember quite the evolution of the telephone to that extent, but I remember when we had our first telephone in our house in this little coal mining village. It was the party line, which meant that there are 5 or 6 people who had the same phone number. 5 or 6 houses in this small village had the same phone number. Now what that meant is that if I chose to, I could listen in on conversations that were not mine, but somebody else's. You know, that's not a nice thing to do, but it's kind of human nature, isn't it? It's kind of human nature. Human nature will enter our conversation many times during this discussion, because I think human nature is the wild card in a lot of the introduction of a lot of technologies. We, in our house, my mother didn't have much trust in telephones. Her attitude was the only time she got a telephone message was when there was bad news. For example, one summer afternoon, we got a telephone call, and my oldest brother, age 27 at the time, died in a mine collapse in West Virginia. My dad had died at age 47 of lung problems, so the coal mines were not kind to us. And my mother just could not bear having a telephone in our house. She eventually got beyond that. But even after that, there were times when we had a telephone, when sometimes people would call with very malicious messages. You know, it's the human nature. There are crank phone calls made by other humans. And over the years, the telephone evolved, regulatory practices were set up, the Federal Communications Commission established ground rules, and crank calls are no longer tolerated. So here's a new technology. It has benefits, it has some side detractions, but in general it's useful. And there were sort of guardrails placed on this technology so they could not abuse the public that was using it, like the FCC's standards and rules. And now let's consider the automobile. Can you imagine? After years and decades of horse and buggy transportation, all of a sudden someone comes to you and says, we have a motorized vehicle that's going to transport you. Can you imagine how shocking that must have been? Well, consider human nature with automobiles. I'm one of those humans, right? I have a little sports car, a Porsche. I love it. Can drive it fast. I've never driven it, even though I live in the Northeast, I've never driven it in ice and snow. It's never been on salted roads. It looks like it's pristine. It's like brand new. But I love that car. I just drive it too fast sometimes. But I know there are speed limits. I respect the speed limits. I try not to violate them too often. but I can't say I don't violate them. But there are guardrails put on this, right? There are speed limits. There are regulatory bodies like the Federal Highway Safety, what is it called? Federal Highway Traffic Safety Administration. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. And they set the standards. They set the standards for highway safety. And then there's the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. They investigate incidents. They look at the cause of those incidents and make recommendations for NHTSA to change the standards and make safety on our roads part of our character. So my point is that in the case of both the phone and the automobile, these are technologies that were introduced into our culture with some degree of regulation. There are people in Washington today who think any regulation is too much regulation. I happen to think that if the regulation is there to provide society with some protection and surety, that it's worthwhile. So I'm not opposed to regulation. I think it serves a purpose. And I guess the summation to my comment, those two examples, is that I think technology has been helpful to humanity in many ways. Usually with some constraints attached, like the NHTSA standards in automobiles. But I do think that technology out of control is dangerous. And that leads me to the discussion that I want to focus on today, which is on our information society. I think the World Wide Web and the internet are two, I think, priceless technologies. We all use them. I think they were introduced, for example, the web was introduced with the idea that it would provide a source of information to people all over the planet, a platform. And it does, provided you've got the technology to access it. So it obviously serves a useful purpose. but it can also be abused. We know that the web and the internet have been vehicles for spreading misinformation and disinformation. We know that they have been used by terrorist groups to recruit new members of their organizations. So despite the fact that it serves as a platform that we all use, we use it every day, the fact of the matter is it has good features and it has troubling features. And that, I think, is true of virtually every technology. Every new technology is like a double-edged sword. It all depends on how people use it. I can use my car to drive people or drive myself somewhere within speed limits, and that's perfectly acceptable. I can also drive it at 120 miles an hour if I choose to, and that's not acceptable. That's dangerous. Well, the same is true of the internet, and the same is true of the web. It can be used supremely well and with benefits to society, but it can also be abused. And I think we have to be sensitive to that. I'm really concerned, particularly in the case of our information technology, that the technology may be getting so far ahead of the public and people that people may look back and say, well, we're getting all this disinformation, misinformation, and fake videos and fake interviews. I saw Abraham Lincoln interviewed a few weeks ago. Abraham Lincoln. That was spooky. And frankly, I felt very uneasy about it. I happen to think that Abraham Lincoln was a very good president, but I did not enjoy seeing him. He was being interviewed on current events. He was talking about Donald Trump. He had a lot to say, but I just didn't feel comfortable with that. And then we know there are fake videos and that put people in circumstances that they'd never been in. And that, I think, is a concern. I think, the bottom line is, I think we must all of us, anyone who's developing or managing the introduction of a new technology into our social fabric, into the marketplace, must recognize that it is a double-edged sword. And it all depends on who people use it. And I think in the case of technologies like the automobile and telephone, we've been very careful about that. We have set up standards. We've set up guidelines. We put guardrails around them. But I think we have not done that in the case of the internet or the web. And I'm concerned that we're big time avoiding that in terms of generative artificial intelligence. And even more with artificial general intelligence and what is called superintelligent AGI. I'm concerned that we're going to get to the point where the public will not be able to distinguish between useful science and technology and science fiction. I think they're distracting to the public. I think they're addictive to many people, especially to young people. And I'm not sure that's a healthy combination. I'm not opposed to them in the sense that I use artificial intelligence. I spoke on this university campus about the Materials Genome Initiative on another visit last year at some point. We use computational material science and engineering to develop new materials. It's supremely useful. And I have colleagues all over the world who are using artificial intelligence. I want to read to you a message I got from a friend in Spain. He is at the University of Valencia. He works on the development of face masks and shields that are used. He started working on them during the COVID epidemic. And he says, AI has been transformative in my work as a researcher, particularly in accelerating processes. Tasks that might have taken me a day or two, whether it's summarizing complex data, exploring new ideas, or drafting technical documents, can now be accomplished in just an hour or two, maybe even less. Beyond just speed, AI serves as an exceptional brainstorming tool, helping me explore perspectives that I might not have considered or synthesize connections across seemingly unrelated areas. It is also incredibly valuable for quickly finding information and checking the novelty of new ideas. This ensures that my work is innovative while building on existing knowledge, reducing the risk of redundant efforts, Researchers who do not integrate AI into their workflows are clearly at a disadvantage. I agree with that. I would guess just about everybody in this room who's a researcher uses AI in some fashion. But there's a difference between AI in the public domain and AI from a researcher's point of view. I make decisions, you make decisions based on facts. They have to be validated, verifiable facts to find their way into the development of a theory or the development of a model. Whether you're doing simulation or modeling computationally, you have to have facts, and you have to be able to depend on them. Now, in a technical sense, I had an interesting experience. I served as editor of a journal called Corrosion Reviews for many years. I ran into an incident where I had an author who sent me a paper, and we sent it out for reviews. Somehow it came back with reviews that looked very strange. And so I contacted one of the alleged reviewers directly, this person I happen to know. And I asked him whether he had reviewed this manuscript and what his comment meant. He said he'd never seen it. He didn't have any idea what it was about. And when I sent him the manuscript, he said, this data looks like it's falsified. So I had to confront the author, who had, in fact, falsified data. He had somehow managed, despite the fact that we sent the reviews out, I don't know how he did this, but he managed to somehow intercept the messages, and he actually composed and sent the reviews back to me. So he had false data in his manuscript, and he had falsified reviews. That's pretty troubling. So when I talk about the fact that there's misinformation not only in our public use of social media, we know there's plenty of that, but there's also similar circumstances in the technical literature. But we, as technologists, have to make sure we're using data that has been validated so that we can feel comfortable that we're using information that is correct to the best of our ability. Now, my attitude is, why can't we do that with generative AI? Why can't we take the position that as technologists, we depend on truth. We depend on validated data in our modeling and our simulation and anything else we do to develop new technologies. Why can't we translate to the public use of generative AI? You know, again, ChatGPT. GPT is generative pre-trained transformer. So you're developing text that is human-like based on input that you provide to this bot. Why can't the technology company say, well, we're going to make sure that the data that's fed in is somehow validated, so that people who are abusers, people who are providing misinformation or lying about data or lying about public policy issues are not feeding information to this agent or bot that's producing text or more? Why can't we do that? So that's really my first question. This bears on an important point. And the first case history I wanted to get to is the decision made by Meta, Facebook, and what is the other one? Facebook and what is their other? Instagram, Facebook and Instagram. The idea was that following the November election, they made the decision at Meta that they were going to discharge their use of third-party fact checkers. And they were going to depend on people on Facebook and Instagram to send in objections to something they read. You know, that's like writing a retraction to a column in a newspaper. How many times do you see them? Almost never. And yet the data gets published. Well, I think doing that, you know, when I think about they're taking that action at Meta, I think that's inconsistent. It's contrary to their technical roots. Technologists depend on the truth, on factual data that is verifiable. But they're going to say, well, we don't care. We're going to publish anything that somebody wants to say. And so the world's most prolific liars, both technical and political, can abuse the system by saying anything they wish. Does that make sense? Not to me. Now, my first question then is, what do you, young people in this group, and maybe some of the faculty too, yeah, what do you think would motivate a company, and Mark Zuckerberg and his staff, what would motivate them to make a decision like that? Can you think of some good reasons? Yes. Oh, wait a minute, you need to get a microphone. I want everybody to hear, and I want to hear too. This is a challenge, isn't it? Watch your step, kid. Yeah, watch your step. Maybe you should stay down here with me. It might be better. Okay, right over here.
So Meta, and really this goes for any large technology company or company otherwise, if you're a large company, you occupy a space in society that grants you a large stream of income, money, and also power that comes from that money, but can also other kinds of power, like a railroad owner can shut down a railroad. That's independent of their money. So Meta currently has money and power. They don't want to lose that money and power. I see any action they take with regards to moderating or not moderating, because we've seen different responses from technology companies to different administrations as principally trying to preserve that money and power. Public good be cast aside.
Okay, I think that's not an unreasonable suggestion. Here's another hand. Let's take a couple. I'm sensitive to the time, so let's go over here. This one over here. Yeah.
So to backpack on what John said, I think that when it comes to Meta specifically, I think their leadership is sort of opportunistic because just like during the previous administration where they kind of took input from the administration on how they moderated their content on their sites for COVID information, they've also now taken input from, I think this is true of a lot of tech companies who were previously opposed to the current administration now have fallen in line because they see cooperation as a way to ensure their own survival and support.
I think you guys are right on target. I would just interpret what both of you have said a little bit differently, but I think you're on target. I think the two most prominent motivators of human nature are fear and greed. Fear of being extorted, perhaps, by political forces, and greed in the sense of wanting to make sure that they're taking market share to the extreme. Now, if I were the CEO of Meta, I might have made that decision too. I might have taken a position, well, I'm sensitive. My shareholders depend on me to make decisions that are going to earn them returns on their investment. And I'm not opposed to that. I know that companies depend on their shareholders depend on income and revenue. I would only ask that they make those returns on revenue that has societal value. And I'm not sure that by taking the position that they're going to essentially allow misinformation or disinformation without challenge, because that's what it amounts to in my judgment, I'm not sure that's really helpful in a social sense. I think that's actually counterproductive. But you guys have touched on exactly where I was going. I'm happy with that. I'm going to move on to the next question. We can talk some more later, but I'm watching the time. So we probably need, I'm conditioned to talk for 50 minutes, but on days like this, it's usually 75 minutes, but I know we don't have that much time. So here's the bottom line to the Meta issue. Number one, I think that as scientists and engineers, we have to ensure that the quality of the data that we use is valid and truthful. And all I'm asking is, why should that be true of our culture in general? If you take medicine as an example, you would not go into a surgical procedure unless you knew that your surgeon had a valid diagnostic tool and diagnosis. You don't go into surgery or get medical treatment based on an opinion. You need to have factual information. Why shouldn't that be true of our culture in general? Why should social media continue to spread misinformation and disinformation when it clearly is doing that into our culture? It has the effect of distracting people from the truth, and it has the effect of, I think, in a way, producing a sense of ignorance. People do not know what's really happening because they cannot distinguish truth from fiction or from misinformation. I think we're complicit, frankly. We're technologists. We produce this stuff. We produce the internet. We produce the web. Now we're generating through through our artificial intelligence other vehicles that may be equally troublesome. There's another hand down here. Could we?
So I like the conversation you're coming up with on how like we could be abusing this technology and how previous technologies have been abused as well. And I think, you've also touched on how it's kind of mind-blowing and the public might not be able to keep up. I think it's kind of comparable to like the dawn of the internet, the dawn of computers being a household technology that we use. There's a gap between generations on literacy with using computers. And actually, something surprising is that the youngest generations I've heard are not as literate in using computers as you'd expect, them having grown up with it, because courses in primary, secondary, which targeted using computers have been dropped. And so actually there's kind of a middle age where people are more literate with it. No, I think with these kinds of technologies, including ChatGPT, that there should be kind of like a course, not just for using computers, but also just for generative AI specifically, and also kind of like a philosophy based on how you should use it, not just how to use it.
Yeah.
Just like how we all agree that plagiarism is wrong, abuse of ChatGPT could come under the same thing. I mean, obviously, a lot of times it's one and the same. It's plagiarism to generate ChatGPT and say it's your own work. But I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that, about how to educate the public, and not just primary, secondary, but also like let people know in general, and what the philosophy around using ChatGPT should be.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair comment. I think there are generational issues, no doubt. But my basic point that I want to make is that I think, you folks are going to become the technological future of this country and of the planet, frankly. You're part of it. You don't have access, I don't think you do, in your classes to anything like engineering ethics. Do you take courses in ethics? You do? Really?
I mean, I did at UMass school, but not here.
Okay. But it's not, my experience is it's not typical. How about social science? Do you have social science in your curriculum? You do. You must be in an unusual department.
I mean, I don't know about Purdue, but in my undergrad at University of Massachusetts, that was required.
You did? Massachusetts? I'm teasing. No, I'm quite serious. I think, you're going to be the corporate executives of the future. You're going to be the Mark Zuckerbergs of the next generation, may be sitting in this room. Your alumni are testimony to that kind of comment. And the fact is, unless you appreciate the fact that, yes, you have shareholders to worry about, but you should also be thinking about the general public. And I think that starts at the university. We need to instill in our students the attitude that technology can serve a useful purpose, but it can also be abused. And we have to make sure that we put proper guidelines into your education so you understand how to use technology at its best. I'm just not sure that we're using artificial intelligence or the web or the internet today at its technological best. There are no guardrails as far as I can see. Maybe there are some, but I can't see them. Okay, let me turn. Oh, you got a question? Go ahead. Yeah. I like questions. Or comments, whatever.
So responding to what you said about engineering ethics classes and how that connects to some of the
contradictions we see in wanting people and institutions to do things that are good by society and good by their shareholders, I think those are very connected, at least particularly at Purdue. When we see people asking for social responsibility in engineering,
Yeah.
we also need to look at, well, how does engineering get done? And
Yeah.
engineering doesn't get done by institutions that are altruistically trying to help society. They're being done by companies that want to make a buck, or they're being funded by militaries. And you can believe that militaries are necessary, but there's a lot of biases that go into that in terms of what types of questions people are going to want to ask, the types of things that people will be willing to do. I think I think if we truly want to see technology pushed in a way that's truly for the general benefit, then it's fundamentally at odds not only with extracting maximum value for shareholders, but also at odds with a university system that is so dependent on grants from companies and the military that they will, they'll say yes to anything. I'm curious if Purdue is, I don't know of a single case of universities like Purdue ever saying, no, some institution is offering us money to build this weapon system, and we say that's unethical and we won't build it. No, Purdue will build it. Purdue will do research for it.
Yeah.
And that's the environment that creates people who don't care about truth.
I grant it's a fair comment. I appreciate your position. I wanted to talk about two other things, and we're running out of time, but I'm going to make two quick comments. One is an extension of what we're talking about is what Vladimir Putin calls political technology. We're enabling, I mean technologists, I don't mean you, I mean technology in general, we are enabling people like Putin to spread misinformation and disinformation across the world in elections, in all sorts of cultural ways. And I have to say, I think technologists are complicit. We don't put any guardrails on this stuff. And I want to talk about one other issue, which is much more happy. And this has to do with nuclear engineering. I served on the U.S. Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board for 10 years. I was appointed by George Bush, and then for 4 years, and then my appointment was renewed by Barack Obama. You could say that this is a nonpartisan issue, but it isn't. It is a partisan. The fact is we don't have the political will or the public will to deal with one of the biggest problems of nuclear technology, and that is waste, nuclear waste. But I think there is an opportunity. We treat nuclear waste as something we want to bury in Yucca Mountain. When I first joined the Nuclear Waste Board, George Bush had passed to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for their approval the Yucca Mountain site. And I went out to Yucca Mountain. I went on a train ride through Yucca Mountain to see what they were doing in essentially a practice tunnel. But we don't have the political will. In Nevada, the attitude is we don't have any nuclear power plants in Nevada. Why do we want to be the waste site? And we don't have the public will. We don't have the political will either, because the congressional delegation wouldn't support it, nor would most of the members of Congress. However, there is an option. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about the internet. We're talking about computational technologies, modeling and simulation. I think there's an opportunity, and maybe this is the best opportunity, to look at our nuclear waste and to consider developing a new nuclear fuel cycle that will make that waste not something that we want to dispose of, but something we consider a resource. It's not an easy task, it's not a given, but I think it is definitely worth taking that challenge. Because frankly, I don't see any way that we are ever going to handle our nuclear waste problem. The United States the Nuclear Waste Act was passed in 1997 or something like that. And we're still nowhere closer to dealing with it today than we were then. So that good news is that artificial intelligence can be supremely useful. And that may be one of the best examples, as is the Material Genome Initiative. but it can also be supremely dangerous. I just want to close by making a comment about one of my, I still have 5 minutes, right? Okay. My role model for how technology should be transitioned to the public is one of my colleagues at MIT, a fellow named Bob Langer. Bob Langer is a chemical engineer. He is the founder of Moderna. He's founded a number of companies, but his comment is always, I want to use my chemical engineering to help people. And he does. I mean, he's developed a company which produces what he calls a pharmacy on a chip. It's an implantable device that can carry medications for elders who may forget to take their medication. It's a wonderful device. He's developed a hair product called Living Proof. Anybody know Living Proof? Yeah, there's one hand anyway. I use the stuff on his recommendation. It's essentially shampoo and stuff like that. But you know what the motto on the bottle says? It says, "We are the science, you are the living proof." I think that's a wonderful statement. It's testimony to the way this guy thinks. You know, his attitude is he wants to help people. And, you know, I really do regard Bob not only as a colleague and a friend at MIT, but as the model for how technology and science should interface with the public. You know, it's encouraging to me, and when I make these visits to Purdue on a regular basis, I see the same kind of character in many of your faculty. People wanting to help people. Your faculty want to help people. That is an attribute that if I were your leader, your technical leadership or your administrative leadership, I would cultivate that to the nth degree. So my message basically is that, and you know, this may be contrary to what's coming off in Washington, but I don't really think it matters whether you're black or Caucasian, whether you're Asian or Hispanic, whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jew, or the grandson of Polish and Ukrainian immigrants, which is my case. We're all inhabitants of a very small planet, and it's in our interest and in our hands as researchers to help people and to help to ensure the vitality and sustainability of our small planet. It's in your hands. And I wish you all the best of luck because I'm depending on it. And so are my kids and my grandchildren. That's what I really care about, the future of my little kids. So I thank you very much for your attention and the questions. I wish we had twice as much time, but thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.